Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast Too Much Disinformation, the pod that uncovers the good, the bad, and the fake of the online world. I'm your host, Rafi Mendelsohn, and on today's pod, we're going to be discussing disinformation as a tool of psychological manipulation. And leading us through this topic is Diane Benscoter. And Diane is the founder of Antidote, an organization advocating for psychological manipulation to be recognized as a public health concern. She founded the NGO drawing from her own experiences as a member of a cult. And in the 1970s, Diane spent 5 years as a member of the religious cult, the Moonies. Since then, she has traveled the world helping former members of cults, hate groups, terrorist groups, and gangs. She has shared her insights and learnings through TED Talks, publishing books, and writing articles. And more recently, she's also been focused on how social media allows extremist groups to target and manipulate specific vulnerable online populations at scale to spread propaganda and disinformation. It's going to be a fascinating topic, so let's start the show. Hi, Diane. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I had the pleasure of meeting you a couple of months ago in England, where you spoke to an audience, and I heard your story, and I just thought straight away we have to have you as a guest on the show. So I'm really glad that we can make that happen. Before we delve into that, though, I do have to ask you, what was your first ever social media platform?
Yeah, I don't know if this actually qualifies, but I think it was AOL chat rooms. And they were very bizarre and strange, but I remember going into them and meeting people up there and talking.
So the main topic of today is disinformation as a tool for psychological manipulation. And you have a particularly interesting, unique insight into this area because of some lived experiences. Now, normally we don't focus on people's background and people's experience, and actually we just straight away unpack the topic that we're going to delve into. But on this occasion, I'm going to break the rules and ask you just briefly to tell us who you are and what that experience was.
Okay. Yeah, when I was a young teenager, actually, I ended up getting involved in a religious cult commonly known as the Moonies, and I was a very dedicated member for 5 years. I really believed that the second coming of Christ had occurred and that I was a disciple of Christ. And it wasn't until my family were able to have me deprogrammed that I left the group. And deprogrammed is a term that I don't really care for that much, but that's the word that was used during that time for someone coming and talking to me about the possibility that maybe I had been lied to. And they started making sense, and I realized that my whole world was falling apart in a moment of realization. It was horrible to recognize that, but also extremely freeing to realize that I didn't have to be part of that anymore.
Wow.
And so since then, I've spent much of my life helping other people leave and trying to find a larger solution to this big problem.
And so I think it's that interesting insight and that perspective that I think allows us to really unpack something that's a little bit different and be able to explore your insight into psychological manipulation. And I know you've given this topic a lot of thought. Some people call it brainwashing. You refer to it and you've established this term as psychological manipulation. Do you want to explain that a little bit more about that to us?
Yeah. I think marketers have known forever that if you want to sell a product or an idea, that you really aim and target at someone's psychological situation, their fears, their anger, their desire to be prettier or a better person or whatever, and you sell your product or service or belief system based on knowing that that's really what they're buying more than the product or the idea. They really want to not feel angry, or to be able to target their anger or to not feel bad about themselves. So that is being used with technology now to create these information silos, these places where people are gather together in cult-like environments online.
So we're going to delve into social media, the online space, and how that's being used as the arena to carry out that activities. But actually, if we take a step back, and it's interesting you mentioned marketers and how that they are employing those same kind of activities. Many would argue that they might be dangerous, but actually many are arguing that marketers are kind of conducting it in a way that is manipulation, but manipulation light. Where is that line where psychological manipulation becomes dangerous, or maybe all forms are dangerous in your opinion?
I think one of the most dangerous things about this is that people don't realize it's happening to them. And when there's a continuum of the danger of this, so people have different psychological needs. They have their need to feel better about themselves vary. And so in any cult-like setting, for instance, there's people who come in and they kind of get excited about the idea at first, but when they look closer, they use critical thinking more, or they don't have such a strong need for it to be true, and they leave earlier than others. Other people really, this answers everything they've longed for. It gives them community. It gives them the opportunity to feel self-righteous. It makes them feel exceptional, and it makes them feel happier about who they are. And it's a complex world we live in, and grappling with complexity is very difficult, and knowing who to trust is really challenging. And so I think people really seek out and want to have relief from that difficult situation of not understanding the world they live in, or not knowing what's good or bad or right or wrong or who to trust. And so it's a real opportunity for people that want to control others. And in some cases, you can control them to the degree that you can weaponize them. In other cases, you might just get them to vote for you, or you might get them to buy your product. But the danger lies in how extensive that environment is that has controlling elements, how many of those controlling elements are inside the environment, and then how vulnerable the individual is, how much they really want it to be true.
And as we've already established, this isn't something new and isn't something that is only happening and taking place in a social media environment. The description you gave actually applies word for word to both the analog world, the real life world that we exist in, has existed for many, many years, but also now the social media experience. What do you think the difference is between brainwashing, between manipulation that takes place maybe face to face or has taken place for many years, and what we are seeing now online?
I think it has to do with scale more than anything. And so, when I joined the cult that I was in, there were a lot of cults happening. Oftentimes, there's more of that kind of those kind of environments happening when there's a lot of social unrest, when people are confused about the world they live in, when they're scared, they don't know who to trust. And that was going on a lot during like the Vietnam War, and there was a lot of social change going on. But you had to be invited over to someone's house, and you had to go to dinner, and you had to listen to a series of lectures and be love bombed by the people around you and to join the group. But now so much is happening online. And so the recruitment and the indoctrination and the control over people's decision-making process is happening at a scale that's never been seen before. The number of people that come to our organization seeking help is huge. And most of the people that come to us these days are not coming to us because of a traditional cult-like environment, but because their father, their husband, wife, brother, sister found this place online where they have come to trust as the only source of information. And what happens in those environments is that you create an us versus them. It's this messaging that happens about the evil them and the good us, and people buy into that. They start feeling better about themselves. They start feeling like they've found what's good and right in the world, and they keep going back to that because in that environment, that online environment, they feel better about themselves. And so it's scale. that is so different and that is very scary. It's very frightening that people can be controlled in the same way that cult leaders and terrorist leaders were able to weaponize people or control them extensively at such a large scale.
So you're actually saying that the many of the techniques are the same as has happened for many years, and the techniques used to indoctrinate and bring people into cults, and now they're just being applied in a different format, in a different sphere, but at a larger scale.
That's
It,
right.
I don't think I've ever thought about it in that way of online cults. You hear the conversation about conspiracy theories or various corners of the internet where people congregate around. Is that? Do you think that's an accurate way of describing it? That actually what we're seeing now is many. It would be challenging to put a number on it, but many online cults appearing.
I think the word cult can be something that people have ideas about what that is, and so it becomes a word that isn't that useful. But what is useful is to kind of break that down and to think about what is an environment where their decision-making processes are being controlled on a psychological level. And so what happens, the thing that you want to do if you want to control people's decision-making processes is pretty simple. You basically create an evil them and a good us. That's one of the first things you do. And so once you've got that, so it's not necessarily the disinformation that is it a fact or not, that's as important as the messaging underlying it. If the messaging in that disinformation has to do with creating an us and a them, and then once you establish that, the other thing you have to do is create mistrust of institutions. And so you can't trust scientists. You can't trust educational organizations. You certainly can't trust the government, and so you're promoting this messaging that is all about those things. And once you create mistrust of institutions, then who do you trust? Who do you go to for your information? And that pushes you right back into those information silos. So the third thing, first there's the us versus them, and then you have to create this mistrust of institution. But third, you have to create a dependency on the information that you're putting out. And so people will go back to their family, their friends, and they'll spout this stuff that's conspiracy theory or that doesn't hold water from a factual perspective. And the reason they're in there anyway is to feel better about themselves. So then they go back and they're told, that's stupid, that's wrong, that's, where are you getting this information? And so they, again, want to feel good about themselves. So they run back into that environment, and they are dependent on this now to feel like, okay, I've reloaded my guns, so to speak. I have these thought terminating cliches, we call them, where they use these phrases and these little cliches, and they go back and they just spout that, and it shuts people up because they just repeat it over and over, and it's supposed to be the ultimate truth, and they can hold on to that feeling that they're better than everyone else. One of the key things that they're selling, like if you're a marketer, you want to make people buy your cream, you tell them they'll be prettier, younger, whatever. One of the main things that's sold that I think is dangerous is exceptionalism. People want to feel exceptional. And in almost all cults and in almost all of these cult-like environments, they're pushing exceptionalism, and people get to feel like, I know what's true. I know better than anyone else. As soon as my family and friends realize this, they're all going to feel so embarrassed that they didn't see it sooner. So that exceptionalism is running through this messaging.
The other word that you mentioned earlier that's still ringing in my head is the need for communities, and that's one of the benefits of social media, our ability to find like-minded people, the things that we enjoy, our hobbies, our interests, and you can find other people just like that. I think a lot of the things that you've just described will ring in the ears of a lot of people of finding mistrust against certain institutions, and then I'm the answer. Only I can be the one that finds the true path. And I think a lot of people will recognize that in different parts of society. How is there a way of solving this before it happens? Is there a way of identifying the early signs?
I think that one of the hard things about this, but that doesn't mean it's not doable, is that we need to increase awareness of human psychological vulnerability to predators that prey on our desires to feel better about ourselves. So we don't talk much about psychological vulnerability in society. It's not something that we talk about, mental health issues, and there's a lot of things that we point out, but we don't talk about psychological vulnerability and how there are people that will take advantage of that. And so I think education is one of the most important things, by just helping people understand that there are people who will take advantage of that, who will offer things that will make you feel better, but that are geared to steal your autonomy and your agency ultimately. They want to make money off of you or gain power or influence. That has always been what predators have wanted. Predators who are selling snake oil, or who are trying to have authoritarian leadership, for instance, trying to break down democracy. What they want it's the same old snake oil. It's the same old tactics of psychological manipulation. So I think we have to take a public health approach to that. And by public health approach, it's a framework that has been used successfully for a number of different kinds of issues. And you work in pillars, basically. And one pillar is helping those people who are directly affected. So we have to have programs and services for people to help their loved ones understand that they've been taken advantage of, or to help people that have walked away put their lives back together. So we need that direct services element. We need education. One of the most effective sources of education are formers. So the more people that leave and can articulate how they were taken advantage of, their stories are really effective in helping others. They're cautionary tales for others. No one wants to be the ex-cult member. No one wants to be the one who fell for a pack of lies, But so these cautionary tales are really effective forms of education. So educating people about this problem, shedding light on it, is really important. And then the third is policy-driven things. How can we build guardrails around technology so that people recognize how algorithms work, how they do kind of create these information silos, how information is pushed at you. Most people don't understand. This audience probably understands that better than me, because a lot of technical people are listening to this. But I think that the average person they really do think that they're doing research, and that they're doing broad research, when really they're just having the same information pushed at them that they've looked at before, because algorithms know that,
And echo chambers, yeah. And with regards to education, does pre-bunking play a part in that? How useful is that?
Depends on what you mean by pre-bunking. I think that if you're looking at fact by fact, has this been fact checked, and can we show you that this isn't really true? I think that's not so effective. It can't hurt, and in some cases it might be helpful, but I think we give it more credit than it really is due. I think that when someone is responding to something on a psychological level, when they're doing it to feel better about themselves, they don't care that much. They're not there to fact check. They believe what's being told to them by whoever it is, because they trust this person. They become their trusted voices, their priest, their teacher. And everybody else is untrustworthy. So it doesn't matter what they say. Most cults are built around things that don't hold water, but people are willing to die for them. I was. And that's because I was not there fact checking whether or not Sun Myung Moon could be the second coming of Christ. I wanted to be there because I went from being a lost teenager to a disciple of Christ. And that was a really big promotion, and it felt really good,
Wow. And I want to also unpack a little bit more about that third point, where you spoke about the different online communities and the spaces that people congregate. And the way that you describe it is information silos, which I don't think is necessarily a term that's often applied to social media. But what do you mean by information silos?
What I mean by that is that there's these walls that are built around these ideas. And it often has to do with that us versus them, or you can't trust anyone but us. And so people go back to these. They might be a forum or some sort of influencer that they go back to over and over again because they've come to trust them because they're getting something out of that. And so what they do is they close off, just like an information silo that we think of in technology, where a part of an organization doesn't have access to this information because it's in an information silo they can't break through to. And it's much like that, but it's on a psychological level, or it's on a grouping level, where these are my people. This is where I feel at home. All of these people in here are saying the same words that I use when I try to defend this idea. And I go back in there and I get more ammunition to go back and make my point. And so they're information silos in that they're environments that they're the only place I trust once I've bought into it. I don't trust anyone else. I'm certainly not going to trust institutions. When COVID was going on so strongly, I think that fear was something that we were all experiencing. It was a really scary time when you couldn't go outside, you couldn't go anywhere. And I think that was a real opportunity for people to make money off of snake oil kind of things. But you saw the same thing happening, these information silo kind of situations where, okay, I trust this person who is selling these products and telling me to take vitamins instead of getting inoculated basically against the virus instead of getting a vaccination. And so once you've bought into that idea, you just go back to that influencer, for instance, or that group of people and try to find, and whoever they refer you to, they'll also be included. So.
And you mentioned about buying vitamins and vaccine disinformation. Are there any other examples where you've seen specific information silos or communities congregate online and how that they've been swept up in this kind of activity?
Well, politically, of course, is a very big one. It's, I'm working with a couple of people who are in jail right now because they were at the January 6th coup or attempted coup. And they really thought, as I've gotten to know them better and understood their story, they really believed that what they were doing was saving democracy. They thought they were saving America, and they were willing to go in there and be violent or to do whatever was necessary because they were thinking that their families and freedom itself was at risk. And so they bought into this messaging about us versus them, and you can't trust those people, so much so that they were willing to do something that now they very much regret.
Wow, that's an incredible insight. And when working and speaking to these people, do you get an idea of their journey of being, let's call them kind of an average person, a congregator on social media that have certain opinions, but they're certainly not fully hooked in. Did you get a sense of what that journey was like, what that online journey was like, how that psychological manipulation took place online for them?
Yeah. Well, as an example, one of the people I'm talking with has been into conspiracy theory kind of subculture groups for years, starting with thinking that the Earth was flat, and then that 9/11 was a government conspiracy, and it was almost like a hobby for him. And he got to feel like he was like smarter than the average person. He had this insight into what was really going on. And I think those
The
kind of
exceptionalism that you were the
yes,
exceptionalism that you were talking about.
yes. And so felt better about himself because he felt this. And then I think a lot of those kind of subcultures were specifically targeted as groups that would align themselves with this kind of anti-government. There's this big evil them, and they're eating babies. And, so once you've kind of bought into a certain, you're already kind of in a little subgroup, a little subculture. Those subcultures can be sucked up into bigger belief systems about bigger conspiracies. And that's how it happened for him. And I do think that there are certain types of people that are specifically targeted. Oftentimes they're less educated and they are angry about their position in life. They feel like they didn't get a fair shake. They're angry at people that are more educated than them, that have more access to money than them, and they want someone to blame. So giving them someone to blame is very attractive to a lot of people.
Wow. And are there any platforms where you see this kind of activity happening more than others?
I think the big social media platforms like Facebook, I think is where a lot of people start. They, somebody in their Facebook group puts something out there and they resonate with it. It might be something that, yeah, I'm angry about that too. And that takes them deeper into it, and they kind of go further into it down that path. So I think it often starts with a social media platform, and then they end up going to pages where there's an influencer that is like QAnon kind of influencer or whatever. It could be somebody in the selling alternative medicine kind of things during COVID. It's one click leads to another down into the deeper levels of even dark web kind of stuff eventually.
And I think that's a really important point where you spoke about the motivation, the financial incentives of why they're doing that. Many of the conversations that we have at Cyabra, people are saying, but why are people doing this? Why are people pumping out this content? Why are people putting out these conspiracy theories? And I think the financial incentives is often overlooked.
I think it's one of three things: power, money, or influence. It's like it boils down to those things. And once you create kind of what I'm calling an information silo, once you create like an audience, and there are a variety of people in there. And like I said, some people on a psychological level need it more to be true. And they get more, they're willing to go march on Washington. They're willing to go do something violent. But then there's people who will just donate money. So it just depends on who the person is and how much they need this to be true. So if you create a big enough audience, you use Donald Trump for an example. If you create a big enough audience, some of them you just get their vote. Some of them you get your donations. Other people are willing to die for you,
And say that you are you call them the word predator, and you're after influence, money, or power.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you can give us an insight into maybe more on a technical level. How does someone go about? How do they go about creating those information silos and to reach people and to impact people and think about the messaging that they want to use in order to do that?
I think that it's really important what you just said. Basically, there's a difference between the actual content, like is it a fact or isn't it a fact, and the messaging, the intrinsic messaging. If you look at the messaging that is in these lies, this disinformation, this intentional lies, you and I, we can tear that apart, and many people that's listening to that, they might work in specifically in finding out where's the lie and where's the truth and trying to stop it there. But if you look deeper into it, what's the messaging that's in there? And if the messaging is about creating an us versus them, if it's about only trust me, if it's about, creating mistrust of institutions, if that's the messaging inside the disinformation, then what they're trying to do is to take advantage of people. on a psychological level. They're selling on a psychological level. It's like, Apple sold the idea that you're cooler if you use Apple products. And so people would go stand in line for hours, asleep at night, just to get the new phone. It wasn't because they need the bells and whistles that are on that phone. They want to go back to their friends and say, look, I have the latest phone. I'm one of the first ones that got it. And so people are so motivated by psychological reasons, by wanting to feel good about themselves. And so if you look at the messaging and look for that kind of underlying message within it, I think we'll be more successful in understanding what's going on with the disinformation than just trying to every single lie, pick it out and say, don't you see this isn't true? Because people don't care as much as you think about whether it's true or not. All they really want to do is feel like they're on the winning team.
I think one of my takeaways, if you allow me to from this conversation, is possibly something of on a more positive note, is that there are ways and there are characteristics and patterns in the kind of messaging, in the approach, in the types of words, in the way that they act, that we are able to monitor, that we are able to and we can keep a closer eye on as that preventative measure in order to be able to see what are people doing and how are people trying to manipulate people psychologically online. And so I think that's one of my learnings, that we can do that. It is possible. We have the technology and ability to do that. I suppose we just need to then address that at scale and bring the issue to a wider audience, which I suppose leads us to the conversation of Antidote and the organization that you founded. But for all of our listeners, what is Antidote and what is the work that you do?
Antidote believes strongly, we believe that we need a public health framework to address this problem of psychological manipulation and its marriage to technology. And so in that pillar of direct services, we're building programs and to educate people who have loved ones who have been directly affected by this kind of manipulation. And it's actually quite effective when you use that framework to give people a basic understanding of why their loved one is doing this, not just instead of just trying to argue with them and feeling like you're beating your head against the wall. We give them actual tools to help them have effective conversations, to help the person realize that maybe they've been taken advantage of. So that's not an easy thing, but it can be taught. And so we're at scale trying to build the skills that people need to be able to have effective conversations. And we're building support groups sort of in the AA Al-Anon model of peer-led support groups so that people can get the support they need if they're just walking away or if they have a loved one that they're concerned about. And then also teaching mental health practitioners, kind of giving them an overlay of what psychological manipulation is so that families who seek like family therapy because their family's been so torn apart by this, or individuals who are kind of coming out of it and don't know who they are, how this happened to them, have better tools, have more people that they can turn to for mental health. But then also we're creating something called the Story Bank that is, we know there's hundreds of people out there that are ex-members of all kinds of things, or people that have been taken advantage of like this, and their stories are so important. And so we're creating a story bank, and we want to use artificial intelligence built into that so that we can go right to kind of the specific places in the footage that we have of people telling their stories, the nuances that someone might be looking for educational purposes, to be able to educate people about certain types of vulnerability and such. So that's one program we're really excited about. And then we're also just trying to make the case that we need a public health approach and what that would be like as far as policy-driven things. What is consent? Where does consent lie if someone is being manipulated in this way? And what can we do as far as guardrails around social media, those kind of things. So it's an uphill battle, but we feel like it's something that can be done. And especially when we look at problems that have been solved by public health framework, population level solutions can be built. And so we feel this is one that can be really affected by a public health approach.
Wow, incredibly important. And I'm really thankful that you came on the pod to be able to tell us your story, to talk us through your perspective on this, and also to explain the work that you're doing. For anyone that wants to get in touch or engage any of your services and hear about it, how can they?
The website, or our website, is antidote.ngo, and there's a contact us page on there that you can use to contact us.
Excellent. And of course, we'll include in the show notes all of the links that are relevant and all the different ways you can get in touch with Antidote and Diane. Before we let you go, Diane, we're going to have to ask you just one final question, same question that we ask everyone before we leave, is to name us one good thing, one bad thing, and one fake thing that you are seeing in the online space today.
Okay. A good thing is that information, having access for people, no matter where they are, to have so much access to information is a really good thing. A bad thing is that people can be taken advantage of in this way. And what was the third one?
A fake, something fake.
Oh, fake. Fake. There's so much fake. But a fake thing is that things are, that there are truths, that there's an us and a them. I think one of the biggest fake thing is that there's an us and a them, when really there's just us.
Wow, amazing. Love it. We haven't had that answer before, and really, really interesting. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure all of our listeners have as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Really appreciate it. And for everyone listening, thanks for joining. And Diane, enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.